Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of On the Mic with Mike. I am your host, Mike Larkin. You guys can check this out on soundcloud.com/mclarkin92, StephenMikeShow.com, as well as WrestlingWithWrestling.com. I'm very excited today because I love doing this show with all facets of life, whether it be in music, acting, professional wrestling, what have you, all different art forms. But today I got someone who I've enjoyed ever since a kid. A big part of my childhood was Nickelodeon's Figure It Out, and I am on the line with the host, Olympian, the beautiful, the amazing Miss Summer Sanders. Summer, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh my gosh, you just made me feel so good. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. I'm going to say this right now. First and foremost, I truly mean that. As a man who was raised by two great women, and my mother and my grandmother, God rest her soul, I'm all about beauty, strength, and dominance, the three key elements that make women the work of art that they are. And you exude and accentuate that. So I look forward to diving into your career and just giving you the platform to tell your story. So thank you.
Oh, so cool. Thanks.
You're very welcome. First and foremost, I got to say this to you. Um, you are looking absolutely fabulous. I see you doing a lot of running with your Instagram. How are you doing during this life in quarantine, man? I mean, you got to stay positively proactive, but I see you doing a lot of great things. But how are you holding up?
Yeah, I mean, I would be lying if I didn't say I had my good days and I had my bad days, but my bad days are mostly just, off days. So I cannot complain. I live in a beautiful part of Utah in the mountains. So open space and 6 feet apart is just our normal every day. So getting outside, being outside, fresh air, movement has been key really to our sanity. I think the hardest part is just having two kids that are online schooling and really missing that interaction and the normalcy of their life.
Oh, I mean, I totally understand. I'll be honest with you. As I was telling you, one of my cousins who's on the forefront in Virginia, unfortunately contracted it. She is a nurse, but it's tough because, again, the homeschooling and stuff. But I guess, I mean, keeping everybody safe is wonderful. But again, it's just like at the same time, it's like, man, I can't wait till things open up, everything gets back to normal. So we're really trying to maintain kind of our sanity and just try to maintain our everyday lives.
Yeah, and do your part, right? And I think the whole doing your part is constantly shifting with things opening up. So it's really getting comfortable with what you are comfortable with. And I'm gathering everybody has sort of different comfort levels, but I feel like I've been doing my part. We wear masks and we definitely keep our distance from people. We wash our hands like crazy. But it is hard to keep the kids positive that, this will eventually go back to somewhat that resembled their old life and they'll get to play with their friends again and be around them. And that's so important for kids. So, I think you hit it on the head, just trying to figure out what parts of life can stay as normal as possible so that you can remain positive. And we choose to do that every single day.
Oh, agreed. And I'll be honest with you. You want to talk about kids, and like I mentioned, kids in the '90s when I wasn't watching Figure It Out Nickelodeon, which we'll get into. Man, I was before the social media age, which social media has its pros and cons. I think for me, just going outside, shooting hoops, reading, and obviously you had video games at the time, the start of the PlayStation ones and Nintendos. You could see the pop culture nerdiness coming out of me, but it was
Uh-huh.
it's one of those times where I mean we get to see the evolution of the social media age, the internet. So it's been very interesting throughout my childhood and my 28 years of life. And I got to say to add to that, thank you for being a part of that because, like I said, that was my childhood, and you were a great part of my childhood.
Oh my God, I loved that show. I was so honored to host Figure It Out. I loved the contestants. I loved our panel, but mostly I loved all those kids at home that lived for it. And I felt it. So I felt my role as the host was a huge honor. I felt like I was sort of representing everything that was amazing about your generation, your creativity, your honesty, just the pure fun that you guys had with life, the mess. It was a joy for me, it's not lost on me. Every single day, I'll run into adults now that watched me on Nickelodeon, and I can tell it the moment that I run into them that I see it. I see it in their eyes. They turn into like these 11 or 12-year-olds, and it's I don't know. It will never get old for me. I truly love it.
I think for me, like you had the prime of Nickelodeon right there. Like you had yourself. You had so many great guests from Irene from the Mystery Files of Shelby
Uh
Woo,
huh.
Andy Tamborelli, Lori Beth Denver, Christy Knowings, Amanda Bynes. The list goes on and on. And I'll be honest with you, the one that popped me, like I talk about professional wrestling, like I loved when you guys had a young Chris Jericho, Nasty Boy Brian Knobs from the Nasty Boys. Like I love the wrestling and the tie-ins that we had from the celebrity aspect along with Nickelodeon. So it made for a great guest and panel as well.
Oh my God. So you're mentioning wrestlers, and then now just throw it back to Joe Namath.
Yep.
Sherman Hemsley from the Jeffersons, Richard Simmons. There, I mean, we had and Dr. J,
Mm-hmm.
Penny Hardaway. So we had, I mean, just a vast variety of age, variety of genre guests that came on, and generally they knew our show, whether they knew it themselves or they knew it because they had a grandkid that watched it or a niece that watched it, or we had one person come on that their kids watched it. So that was such a joy for their kids to watch their parents get slimed. But you're right. I mean, that was the other part of it. We got pretty popular so that our guest panelists became kind of big time. And I was awestruck half the time.
And it is. And I mean, for you, you get to be around this. And also, the great thing about it is the kids with so many great talents, whether it's accentuating their flexibility. I remember there was one where the kid had like the lizards hanging from his tongue.
Uh-huh.
There was so many outrageous stuff, but it's so great to see the uniqueness and the creativity that represented the kids of that era.
Well, yeah, and you know what's funny is that at the same time I was hosting NBA Inside Stuff. So I was living in New York. So I would be in the Garden, Madison Square Garden, watching a Knicks game. And before the game, I would have these young kids run up to me it was almost like a mini audition. They would show me what their talent was. And they were like, do you think it's good enough to get on your show? So of course I didn't have the heart to say I'm actually not in charge of casting, but I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, you need to submit that. I can't wait to see you on the show. So my two worlds really collided, and I loved having those two identities.
Oh my goodness. And yes, I mean, I've seen a lot. Here's the thing, and I'm going to say this about you. Like, I love your broadcasting work. I know you did some stuff with WNBA, like you mentioned, the NBA sports. Like, I mean, you had this time period of the Knicks. Like you mentioned, Dr. J, Penny Hardaway. You're talking about Stephon Marbury at the time on the cover of NBA Shootout. We're talking about a lot of great stuff around the late 90s to mid 90s. The NBA, I mean, Shaq and Kobe, God rest his soul. You were looking at the prime of the basketball season. That is, the NBA around this time period.
Yeah, well, I'm watching The Last Dance right now. Are you?
Oh my God. I unfortunately am not. I have that saved, but I'm going to check it out. Thank you for reminding me now. I got to watch the
Oh,
last.
it's so good. So it was my life. I mean, I grew up a Jordan fan. I feel so honored that that was kind of the highlight. It was like high school into college years. I would travel with my Michael Jordan posters to all my swim meets. I'd put them up on my hotel walls with toothpaste. I was kind of a maniac when it came to Jordan. So it was a dream for me to host Inside Stuff. I would watch it all the time before I started hosting it. And then when I got to host it, of course, I met all these guys who were, the NBA superstars that I'd watch on TV. So I felt so honored to really, I felt like be in the prime time of the NBA. And, people will argue that Showtime Lakers and, the Magic and Larry era was amazing, and it surely was. But the Jordan era it really made the NBA what it is today. And watching The Last Dance just brings it all back.
I will definitely check in on that. I have that saved. But the thing with Jordan, with me, like, you talk about being a maniac. Like, I loved his career from the Chicago Bulls. Hell, I even stuck around when he was on the Washington Wizards, and of course, the iconic Space Jam film. But yeah, he's one of those guys. Say what you will about him, because he could get a reaction. He invoked a lot of emotions, and you were interested from his dunks and the way he played the game. Everybody was invested in MJ.
Yeah. Oh my God, it was so fun. I'd watch his games, and then I'd go to practice or I'd go to a meet, and I'd be so fired up. I mean, I taped his Arsenio Hall guest spot. He was interviewed on Arsenio Hall. I don't even know if you remember that show, but
Yep.
I taped it. So I had a VHS tape, and I almost wore my VHS tape out. I mean, I basically had that thing memorized. It's kind of embarrassing that I'm saying that out loud, but it is. He did influence so many people, and the things I remember about Jordan is that you had to work hard. You needed to put everything into it and be competitive, and don't be afraid to be competitive, and figure out how to get better every single time. And that's kind of what he taught me as an athlete.
Oh, great. And I mean, when you were talking about Arsenio Hall, and I'm going to say this right now, I'm a 92 kid, you know what I'm saying? So I was around when the Arsenio Hall show was at its peak. You're talking about guests like Color Me Bad, Randy Macho Man Savage, even a couple years before that, him and Coming to America with Eddie Murphy. One of the top
Uh-huh.
comedians. Love that show from top to bottom. Very underrated, too, because a lot of people they always think like the Lenos and the Lettermans, but Arsenio Hall was top notch.
Oh, he was so good. So, I mean, listen, he was an icon, and he had a bit of a movement with his whoop whoop thing that he used to do. Yeah. So yeah, it was an era. It's, similar to Nickelodeon. It's like, then you get so many choices, and there are umpteen channels. and you have a lot of choices. And yeah, I don't know why Arsenio Hall's show didn't stick around, but I certainly watched it.
I'm right there with you, and I got to say, because we were talking about, like you mentioned Nickelodeon, I was going to ask you about Nickelodeon as a whole, because man, you're on here with Figure It Out. You got the Wild Style, you got Family Style, so many different variations of Figure Out around this time period. I loved watching them all. So for me, you're on there with shows like Keenan and Kel, all that. I mentioned the Mystery Files of Shelby Woo. Primetime era. I'm talking about Snick here, Miss Summer Sanders. Like
Yeah.
that's the time period. That's the lineup for kids my age. And Nickelodeon Gas, Nick Arcade. We are in there. We are hooked, and we invested to Nickelodeon in your overall show.
Yeah, you know what's so funny is I just did a Zoom call with it was Phil Moore
Hmm?
and Mark Summers. And we had Mike O'Malley that popped in for a second. But there are a lot of people who still, I mean, I recognize that that is your youth. And then, so to take that and sort of spin it on its head and look where, Keenan is right now on SNL. I think we all can kind of sit back and say, oh, I'm so proud of him in this sort of like, like he was one of us growing up. And now look at what he's done with his career. It's really exciting.
Agreed. Well, 100%. And I got to say this about you because, like, I remember, I'm going to say this right now. I loved watching everybody get slimed. I remember as a 5-year-old when I used to take my baths, man, I used to pour the water on me like Danny Tamborelli every time he got slime. I was like that invested because every time Danny got slime, you knew it was going to be memorable. You knew it was going to be fun. And I loved the interaction specifically when Danny Tamborelli would get slime.
Yeah, totally. Well, he reacted that way because he's awesome and he
Yes.
knows that you kids loved it, but also because that the slime was kept in ice cold refrigerators, not just your standard refrigerator, like ridiculously cold. So when it was dropped on you, it was freezing cold. Um, so that response is legitimate shock because you've just been basically frozen. And also the fact that you just got slimed. But the dog pound, I don't know if you remember that. People in the dog pound loved it. Yeah, super cool. It's so many memories on so many levels, right?
Oh yes, and one of the things I'm going to say this right now. Every time I would watch Jay and Summer Sanders, and when he would introduce really get invested in the show. And I'll be honest with you, I wanted me a bike. I wanted me a Toys R Us gift card. I was ready. I was want to be one of those kids in the audience to get a mountain bike, a friggin' Toys R Us gift card. I loved it. And one of the things I also used to love is I put this on my pop culture page because I'm a pop culture nerd. I'm sure you could tell as we're discussing this. Man, the
Uh-huh.
board game. I still have that to this day. It's back in my garage. I love it. I used to play the hell out of that.
Seriously, I have one actually. It's in my office right now. It's still in plastic. I thought of saving it for my own kids, but I don't know if they're gonna. I don't know if they're gonna be interested in playing it.
Well, that's the thing, man. That's the beauty about this thing called life. You know, we get to teach it to the next generation for those who aren't familiar with Figure It Out. I mean, I know the gentleman who hosted Brain Surge would also go on to host Figure It Out later on, but I got to say this right now. When it comes to you, and I'm going to say this before I even get to my sentiment, one of my favorite moments, and I also love seeing you get slimed. I remember, I believe, Lori Beth Denberg hosted for a little bit on the show, and then you got slimed on that
Uh
episode.
huh.
So you yourself got slimed. Now, I'm curious to asking you, as someone who's hosting on that end, being in the forefront on the panel, along with the charade brigade, the whole nine. What was that like for you, Miss Summer Sanders, to get slimed?
Oh my God, it's the best. I mean, then you become like there's winning a gold medal, and maybe just right below that is getting slimed. Yeah, it's life changing. It's shocking, even if you know it's going to happen. But it's life changing, and then forever you get to say, "I got slimed." But I got slimed 3 times, and that sort of changing roles with Lori Beth was a big deal. Lori Beth could not wait to host it. It was so fun. So fun. She loved every single second of it.
Man, I could tell watching you. I think that's you. You hit it right on the nail on the head here. It's really just about having fun, and that's what a Figure It Out encompassed. And I'm going to say this about you. Besides being, figure it out and what you're doing, I also love the fact that when you talk about Olympics, and I always got to say, I always respected each and every sport because it's the art form and the endurance and the training that goes into it. I got to say thank you for what you did in the Olympics because you absolutely killed it on the swimming end side of things.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it was a long time ago, but gosh, every day removed from that moment is more special. The moment becomes more special to me. So thank you. Yeah, I love that. I love that I was an Olympian. I love the fact that I had that special time in my life and that I remember it vividly. So I think there's many levels of an Olympic moment that can sometimes be lost. but I'm so grateful that I was able to remember it all and appreciate it on so many levels, Mike. It's like, I appreciate my parents for helping me through every step of the process, my brother, my teammates, my coaches. I kind of, anytime I look back on that, obviously I'm honored to represent the United States, and I'm honored to represent, my university. But I just felt so lucky that my community and my supporters were vast and dedicated, and I know I was lucky because of that.
Oh man, it's one of those things where like you hear about Olympians and stories. Like again, not to go to wrestling with this, but here's the thing: I was a kid. My father started watching wrestling, and he's the one who got me hooked on it. Right, so I got to learn about Kurt Angle, who obviously for wrestling fans know he's the Olympic gold medalist that won a gold medal with a broken.
Yeah.
So I always respected the Olympics and people that fought and that's then it like yourself representing our country. Now you had that book, Champions Are Raised, Not Born: How My Parents Made Me a Success. And I wanted to actually mention this because I love that title. Number two, you're talking about your love for your parents. Like my parents, I got to say, I thank God because it's one of those things where your parents instill the values and the morals and the overall work ethic that encompasses you as an overall being. And I think they did a great job with yourself, and it really shows within your work ethic, Summer.
Oh, you're so sweet. Yeah, I think my parents were like perfectly imperfect. They divorced when I was 7. It was very tough on my brother and I and them, of course, but they did the best they could. And they certainly didn't push me with my sport at all. There was a very clear line where coach was and parent was, and they were very, very much on the parent side. And, my coach, both my coaches were amazing, and they stayed on the coach's side. And I think many times, and the reason why I wrote the book is many times that line and that gets crossed, and that line is blurred. And then you have some problems with kids burning out, kids at a very young age feeling like their sport is their job, and they for it, and it's a shame. So I think you're right. My parents, they brought perspective. I knew I had a very strong foundation of love that was never wavering, depending on the outcome in my swimming races. And that can be really fragile to a young mind if you feel like if my parents aren't going to love me if I don't win. And that it was never even close to entering my mind in my life.
I think what's great about it is, and like that you mentioned that, it's one of those things where as long as you try your best and you put the effort into it, I mean, that's all they want. As long as you're also happy with what you're doing. And like you were talking about, like when you look at the swimming aspect, and I'll be honest, going back to my pop culture nerdiness, I remember as a kid, like watching Disney Channel. Now we have Disney Plus now. I remember watching The 13th Year, one of the big movies that encompassed swimming and him being a merman, as it was titled. I remember Swim Fan with Jesse Bradford, Erica Christensen, and Shiri Appleby. Different, more like the thriller type aspect with that film, but it's one of those things like and you obviously a lot of people talk about Michael Phelps and the swimming aspect of it, but for you watching those old clips, watching you just work your ass off just as far as the swimming aspect in the Olympics, I think it's very inspiring for a lot of people that want to get into swimming, not just swimming, but the overall essence and the endeavors that happen in our lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, to make it to the Olympics is a ridiculous amount of work, but if you peel away all the work, there is joy to our sport. And I will forever love my sport. I mean, anybody who asks me, and you mentioned in the very beginning, my running that I do, running is my heart, but swimming is my soul. I mean, right now I can't get in the pool. Our pool is going to open up on the 15th of May, and I am running to go do some lap swimming. And I would never have said that in years past. I miss the water. I miss the chlorine. I miss that feeling of weightlessness and the floating. It really is my original, I don't know, water, my original element.
I got to say, people talk about storytelling. I mentioned every sport being an art form. I got to say, watching you also swim, I got to use this word here. Man, the grace and just what you did there. You talk about the floating aspect. You're very graceful. Like I said, very graceful in what you did, Summer.
Oh, thank you. Well, sometimes it didn't feel graceful, but that one last stroke I had to win my gold medal was as graceful as I got. And I hit right on stroke and lucked out and touched first.
Hey, that's what it is, man. It's all about success and just just the overall grit that you have. There's another one, but yeah, like you said, talking about swimming as a soul, running in the heart. Like, put that on a T-shirt for God's sake. There's a market here. Oh my goodness! But Summer, I got to say this about you because not only have you done a lot of great broadcasting, we touched upon the NBA and we touched about your Olympics. We touched upon Figure It Out. There's actually one other thing I had to ask you about Figure Out because man, I was watching a lot of old school stuff on YouTube. Anything that I could get my hands on Figure It Out related. There was this one episode where it was talking about flicking quarters off the ankle. Now I got to ask you because a lot of people touch upon this. Was this with a young Sam Roberts before he would do Opie and Anthony, before he's doing the work that he's doing for WWE? Everybody talks about a young Sam Roberts being on Figure It Out.
You know what? I don't remember. I mean, you stumped me. This is hilarious. Do you remember who he was on the panel with?
Oh my goodness! I think Lori Beth was on the panel, and I think as well we had Danny
Probably
Tamborelli.
Danny Tamborelli. He's
Yep.
always there.
Yeah, Danny Tamborelli, Lori Beth Denberg, I believe Amanda Bynes, and I think this one might also had Kevin Coppolo from All That on it.
Oh, seriously?
Yep.
Oh, that's so funny. I mean, we taped every season, we taped 40, I want to say like 47 shows, 45 to 47 shows. And we would tape at least 3 shows a day. So we would tape it all in 1 month. And it got to the point towards the end of my taping where I had to really, really practice and remember who the guest was because I would get so confused with combining episodes. You know, my brain was slime, basically. So I forget a lot of them. That's why I need to go back and watch them. I wish they would put them back on Nickelodeon so we could all revisit our youth.
Man, all right. See, you just segued into something great with that. All right, so I believe, yes, I mentioned Danny Tamborelli, Amanda Bynes, Lori Beth. I think it either been Kevin Coppolo or Phil Moore from Nick Arcade. It was either one.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, just to reiterate to what Summer's saying, it was one of the regular panelists that we've seen. But that's a lot of things you also brought up, like the taping that goes into that. And there's a lot of people that come through, a lot of familiar faces, like we mentioned, and we've talked about from different genres and all facets of life. But for me, I think that's cool. Just the amount of taping that goes into it and just the work that you put in for the kids and just for everybody that's in that audience. You had to invest in.
You know, you have to think about it. The hardest working group on that show really was the hair and makeup team. Because whoever got slimed, and generally, I mean, if it was Danny getting slimed, then you know that there was residual slime heading in the left and right direction on the panelists. So it wasn't just Danny that had to take a shower after every taping, but it was the people around him. So they would have to take a shower, get all the slime out, dry your hair, redo your hair and your makeup, and then get ready for the next taping. So you'll notice if you were to go back and look at some of the shows, but it's pretty apparent with a lot of, especially the girls, like the regulars, like Amanda and Lori Beth, you could tell if it was the 4th show on like a Friday, because they were like, I do not want to take my like 100th shower of the week. Like, I am done. I do not want slime. I do not want slime. So every 2 seconds, they would be like on edge if the secret slime action was going to happen, and they'd hold that helmet up so they would not get slime on their hair, or they'd jump out of their seat so they wouldn't get slimed. But yeah, I mean, people were getting slimed left and right and having to shower and put makeup on. So the dedication was off the charts. That's, I think, why Lori Beth wanted to switch places with me and go into the host chair so she didn't have to worry about getting slimed.
Man, it's one of those things, and I think I'm actually glad that you mentioned it, because if you notice, like, and I think a lot of people can when you rewatch Figure It Out, like you mentioned, Amanda does it, Christy does it, Danny, Lori Beth, I believe Mark Saul, who was on All That, has done it a couple times. They hold the hat right before the slime. You're correct.
Yeah. They don't want it. There are times when they just don't want it. They're just done. So yeah, I guess I have to go back to the sliming. If you're in that seat, and we did 4 seasons of Figure It Out, if you're in that seat, sliming does get old, but I know a little kid is never going to want to hear that. So I don't say that very loudly, but for the regulars on Figure It Out, I do recognize that there was a point when you're like, yeah, I can't do that slime one more time today.
Man, and you also brought this up because here's the thing. Nickelodeon, I've said this a lot on different channels. I think a lot of people, it's funny because in the age of the internet where people start petitions to see shows come back, it's amazing just to see, because like watching Nickelodeon Gas and Nickelodeon at the time in the 90s, I would love to see some of the old school Figured Out. I know they did it with the 90s are on All That, from Nick, I believe it was Teen Nick, and Nicktoons TV and what have you. But it's one of those things in the end, Noggin, excuse me. It's one of those things where I'd love to see like a lot of reruns come back, like for Disney Channel, for God's sake. I remember watching the DComs at like 3 o'clock in the morning because they would play like the newer ones at 8 p.m. And as a kid with nostalgia, I love to see them play a lot of the old stuff. And same with Nickelodeon. But yeah, I totally agree with that. We should have some more old school figured out it yourself summer. I mean, not just 90s or all that, but just playing for the youngins, introducing what we've had in the past.
It's funny. We were talking about that on our Zoom show, and I think it was Mark Summers that said the people who enjoy it the most are actually the people who watched it. So the adults now that were kids back then and watched it, it's hard to grab the attention with what we loved and expect the kids of now to love it as well. So, but I do think that it could be reinvented for late night, figure it out in sort of an adult format that could be really, really fun. And I think that would work well.
Oh, I mean, I agree. I mean, I look at what they're doing with all that and Keaton and Kel being involved, and they're bringing back people like Christy Knowings and Josh Server and everybody for all that for the newer generation to get introduced to. And I think what's cool about it is like Mark Summers, like I was such a huge Double Dare fan as a kid. I remember what would you do? So like having that new generation is great. Like I'll be honest, I remember watching Double Dare 2000. I'm like, it's good, but it's when you think of Double Dare, you think of Mark Summers. So I could totally understand as a kid and you grow up and you're kind of accustomed to like this host and how the overall objective of the show is. So I can understand it, but yeah, I think you hit a nail on the head.
Yeah, it would be so fun. I'm right there with you.
Now another thing.
I'm glad you're such a fan of all these things. It's awesome to hear it, and the passion is just jumping through the phone. I love it.
Thank you. And another thing that I'm very passionate about with my work is we get to touch upon a lot of great topics with yourself. I wanted to ask you about The Apprentice, because another show that teaches a lot about business and being a part of it with the man who is now our president, Donald Trump, how crazy is that? Because, from the reality aspect, the reality TV show, I mean, I was a kid, like, again, the wrestling mindset. I was at WrestleMania 20. Donald Trump's in the audience. And as a 12-year-old at the time, I'm like, man, there's no way in hell would I think like years later we'd see him as the president. But here we are. We are in 2020. Donald Trump is the president of the United States. Talk about that experience being around Donald Trump and the overall experience with The Apprentice summer.
Yeah, I mean, The Apprentice was fun. And I had a great relationship with Donald Trump when we were on the show. And it was, reality TV is so weird. So talk about like the behind the scenes. There's so much, like there's a script that I believe was like being floated around, and they would sort of pit certain people against other people. I felt like there was a handful of us that were really, really just innocently playing for our charities. And then maybe there were others that were there to stir the pot and get people riled up, because that's what makes reality TV awesome. I think our season was a pretty tame season. And then I don't know if you remember, but Bret Michaels had that real serious health scare. And it did kind of bring all the cattiness and pettiness down to nothing. And it became a pretty sincere season playing for your charity. And there were lots of tears and sincerity with diabetes charities and cancer charities. And of course, Holly Robinson Pete with her autism charity, and my charity, Right to Play, which brings sport and play to developing countries and children who've been affected by war. And the funny thing was, I don't think our ratings were great because we didn't have a lot of fighting going on. And there's a bit of it that Holly and I sit back and are super proud of that, because it just kind of proves that you can change the way people see things and react to things when you're consistent with just kind of your behavior in general. So it was fun for me. It was nerve-wracking. It was crazy. But I do cherish that experience.
It's one of those things where, I mean, like you talk about less drama. That's the thing. I know a lot of people tune in for reality TV because they like the fights, they like the drama, but I noticed that. And I think for me, I can relate to a lot of those charities as someone whose mother has diabetes. And I know a lot of people have gone through cancer and stuff like that. Myself, I'll be honest, I'm an epileptic, epilepsy. I've had 5 seizures, and knock on wood, thank God, I'm still here doing what I do. But it's one of those things.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So you can relate to like people, whether from a neurological standpoint, from people who have cancer, from people that have diabetes. I mean, they're keeping on. And I got to say, for Bret Michaels, as someone who's a fan of his reality shows from Poison, I mean, I still remember I still remember as a kid, like getting into the passenger seat, and my dad had the old Poison CD, talking about talk dirty to me, and we're talking about every rose has its thorn. Like
Yeah.
that's a vivid imagery in my mind. But yeah, that season from top to bottom, y'all rocked it.
Yeah, it was so fun. I mean, Brett Michaels, the one thing about him, first of all, he's so kind. Um, he loves his fans so much, and they love him right back. They are dedicated to him, and they show it. If he is in earshot, they are screaming. Even if he's not, they are screaming. And he really gives his time and energy back to them. So there's so many things about Brett Michaels that were great. And obviously Holly is just, very dear to me even to this day. Yeah, I didn't know a thing about business. I just gotten done having my second child. So Spider and Sky were both under 4 years old. And I was barely sleeping at all. So to just walk into a reality show where you never slept, it was very familiar to me.
I gotta say this though. I think what's great about also that, like you mentioned, talking about Holly being dear to you, the friendships and the camaraderie and everything that you make from every experience that we have in life, not just from reality TV. But I think that's also what's a gain and what's a pro about doing shows like that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the camaraderie from my swimming days, my inside stuff days. I just went to New York before the coronavirus for David Stern's funeral, and I got to see so many friends there, and they were truly a part of my family. I mean, it was really wonderful to be around them again. And then, of course, my Nickelodeon family, many of which are now running networks all over the place, big time jobs. But yeah, moments in life that you'll never ever forget. So yeah, I've been super blessed and very grateful. And sadly, Mike, I have to run. I'm so sorry. I feel like we could talk forever.
I,
We're like
oh, I
old
have
high school friends.
That's fine. Actually, I'll finish up with a final question here because
Yeah.
you got a badass family. Your kids are very lucky to have a badass mom like yourself. You've done things like keywords. You've done so many game shows. I wanted to ask you, what advice would you give to anybody who wants to pursue a career in broadcasting, just going to the Olympics, being game show, being what Summer Sanders has done? What advice would you give them?
Try everything. Don't let fear drive a decision. Go for it. You've got to work hard, you've got to study hard, but you have to follow through. You have to put yourself out there. You can't wait for somebody to ask if you would like to audition for this job. You need to put your name in there. You need to work hard and show your passion. You've got to be able to start from the bottom and work your way up. Confidence, but again, everything just comes back to hard work. So if you want it badly enough, you're going to make it happen.
Beautifully said. Adhere to the words of the great Miss Summer Sanders. Now, Summer, this is where I step back. Beauty, strength, and dominance, three key elements that make women the work of art that they are. You are a beautiful human being inside and out. Promote the social media. The floor is yours, Miss Sanders.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. Do you want me to tell you my social media handles? Is that what you'd like me to do?
Yes, Facebook,
Oh,
Twitter, Instagram, where everybody can follow you. Please go right ahead.
okay. It's all just at Summer Sanders _. And then Facebook is just Summer Sanders. Thanks a lot, Mike. That was really sweet.
You're very welcome. Guys, tune into the next edition of On the Mic with Mike. For Summer Sanders, I'm Mike Larkin. Thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.